On a dark spring night in rural Minnesota, a young man picked up his phone, calmly dialed his parents, and said he'd accidentally driven into a ditch. He wasn't hurt, he just needed a ride. He stayed on the phone with them for 47 minutes, walking, describing his surroundings, saying he could see the lights of a nearby town. And then, out of nowhere, he said 2 words. "Oh, shit." Then silence. This is the unsolved disappearance of Brandon Swanson, a case that defies logic, stretches across empty fields and forgotten gravel roads, and ends in a silence that still hasn't been broken. It was May 14th, 2008. Brandon Swanson, 19 years old, had just finished his spring semester at Minnesota West Community and Technical College. He was majoring in wind turbine technology. That night, he was in Canby, Minnesota, celebrating the end of term with friends. He wasn't a reckless kid. By all accounts, he was responsible, cheerful, well-liked. Brandon had a couple of beers that night, but friends later testified he wasn't drunk, just relaxed. Around midnight, he got in his green Chevy Lumina and began the drive home to Marshall, about 30 minutes away. The roads were narrow and dark. There were no lights, just miles of farmland, ditches, and gravel roads. At around 1:15 a.m., Brandon's car went off the road and got stuck in a ditch. He wasn't injured, but he was stranded. He called his parents, Brian and Annette Swanson. Calmly, he told them he believed he was near the town of Lind. He asked them to come pick him up. They got into their truck, kept him on the phone, and headed out. Brandon stayed on the phone with his parents for nearly an hour. They drove to Lind. He said he could see the lights of the town. His parents flashed their headlights. Brandon said he couldn't see them. He flashed his. They saw nothing. Something wasn't right. Brandon said he would start walking toward the lights. He was sure they were Lind. His father drove slowly behind, trying to find him. They kept talking. He was lucid, calm. There was no sense of panic, and then, at exactly 2:30 a.m., Brandon said, "Oh, shit," and then nothing. The line was still open. But Brandon never spoke again. Brian and Annette were confused. Was it a dropped call? Had he fallen? They called again and again. No answer. The line kept ringing, but no response. At sunrise, they contacted the police. What they were told was chilling and infuriating. Brandon is an adult, they said. He's 19. Maybe he wandered off. Maybe he'll come back. The Swansons knew better. They pushed, and eventually, by later that day, law enforcement pinged Brandon's phone. What they found changed everything. Brandon hadn't been near Lind. In fact, he was 20 miles away, near Taunton, Minnesota. He had been walking in the opposite direction. His car was soon located in a ditch off a gravel road, doors locked. No sign of a struggle, no blood, no footprints, nothing. The discovery of Brandon's car marked the beginning of an exhaustive search effort. Police, local volunteers, and later state investigators combed through every inch of the surrounding farmland. Cadaver dogs were brought in, and for days, search teams walked shoulder to shoulder, scanning ditches, fields, and fence lines. The most compelling clue came from scent dogs. They were able to pick up Brandon's trail from the car. The dogs followed a path that led down the gravel road, through open fields and toward the Yellow Medicine River. Along this route, there were no signs of a struggle, no discarded items, just the dogs' alert signals. Near the river, the scent became erratic and eventually disappeared. That led investigators to believe Brandon may have fallen into the river. They brought in boats and divers. The river was thoroughly searched, once, then twice, but no remains, no clothing, no personal belongings were ever recovered. Complicating the search was the terrain. The area was filled with culverts, abandoned wells, and steep embankments. Some theorized Brandon could have fallen into one of these, especially if disoriented in the dark. Nighttime in that part of Minnesota is absolute blackness, no lights, no cell service, and in May, the nights are still bitterly cold. Authorities considered another possibility. Perhaps Brandon had crossed the river safely, but had been injured afterward, or collapsed due to hypothermia or a hidden medical condition. The problem was that nothing supported that. There were no remains, no trace. Search teams expanded their range. Hundreds of acres were covered. Helicopters equipped with infrared cameras flew overhead. Grid searches were conducted for days. Nearby farmers opened their properties. Volunteers on ATVs scoured every accessible path. One theory even suggested that Brandon had been picked up by a stranger, maybe someone passing through in the early morning hours. But the roads are rural. Locals would have noticed a strange vehicle. And there was no indication Brandon had made contact with anyone. Another complication was the phone call itself. The GPS data from Brandon's phone was limited. It only pinged a tower near Taunton, not giving a precise location. After he said, "Oh shit," the call remained connected for several minutes, but Brandon never spoke again. Despite the limitations, law enforcement considered the effort one of the largest and most thorough searches in Minnesota's history. But after weeks of combing the area and turning up nothing, the case began to stall. The land had given up no clues, and the river, thought to be the most likely resting place, was silent. Weeks passed, then months. There were no credit card charges, no sightings, no phone activity. The Swansons continued to search. They created flyers, set up tip lines, pressed law enforcement. Frustrated with the initial police response, they pushed for legislative change. In 2009, Brandon's Law was passed in Minnesota, requiring police to begin immediate investigations when an adult is reported missing under suspicious circumstances. The law has helped other families, but for the Swansons it hasn't brought Brandon back. Every May, on the anniversary of his disappearance, Brian and Annette return to the fields. They say a prayer, leave flowers, and hope. Brandon would be in his 30s now, a man, a life unlived. The gravel roads near Taunton still sit quiet. The fields still stretch flat toward the horizon. But somewhere out there, beneath the soil or in a memory, is an answer. Until then, Brandon remains a voice in the dark, a name etched into Minnesota law,